Hello, hello, guys. How you doing? Can you hear
You know,
me?
yo, yeah. How you doing, bro?
I'm good, guys. It's good to see you guys. Sorry, man. I have an eye infection. I think you can see my other eye. Looks like someone punched me in the face.
Yeah, look
But
like you met up with young Nelson on the way
you know
back
what I'm
home from
saying?
work.
But I didn't want to delay this because look, one thing I appreciate about you guys is that. You guys are doing something really great for the country. And I don't think that a lot of people see it yet, but I think in the long run they will. And I didn't want to delay this any further because I don't know if you guys remember me. I met you guys last year at Comic-Con.
Yeah, the
And
Comic Con, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I was just geeking out, man. I was just so excited to see you guys because I've seen you guys on I think on YouTube. I think somewhere in 2021 or 2020 somewhere there, and I just loved your interviews. But before I ramble, just
Yeah,
wanted you guys to just introduce yourselves to the audience, whoever's gonna be watching this later on, just so that they can
yeah.
get an understanding of who you guys are.
Yeah. So I'm Pamelo. I'm the writer and like editor of the Young Nelson comic book project. And basically under the publishing brand Rumination Comics, my brother and I create original African superheroes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm Umpile, and I'm the creative director for Remuneration Comics and like the Young Nelson brand, respectively. So all the visuals, the artworks, branding, that's pretty much what I try to look into when it comes to Remuneration Comics.
That's awesome, guys. There's so much that I would like to discuss, but I guess let's start from the beginning, man. How did this concept come about, Camilo? I think you're the one that actually came up with this concept, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think coming from a hip hop background, I was kind of at a writing lyrics, and obviously, you might write a punchline about someone, or so I'd actually written out a song that I'd kind of just put aside, and I titled it Young Nelson. And the more I
Mm.
came back to it, it starts with the quote like, "Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You could be that great generation." And then I just, as you're reading the quote, it's written there, Nelson. I'm like, the struggle wasn't enough. We need a second help. And I'm starting to feel like a young Nelson. And that's kind of from that like punchline is where I thought, okay, what if this character moved through space and time? And around that time, you're seeing Black Panther, trailers going, and you're like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, and I think I remember I played football, and you hear guys getting called Messi, Messi, Ronaldo, Ronaldo, and I'm like, how would a guy get called Nelson, like not having that as a name?
Right, right,
And then I just imagine boxing, you get your nickname, you're the Italian stallion, or you're the, Iron Mike Tyson. So I'm
right.
thinking, what if this kid is, so basically this kid moves through my mind, and from a song, I'm like, as well, I'm getting old as an MC, so I was like, maybe also from a storytelling perspective, my storytelling could be a little bit more, almost like a wiser, not maybe not wise, but maybe somebody who could look at a younger generation and speak to them from a
Mm.
older vantage point.
Right, right.
Morals, ethics, the value of those morals and ethics in a very real time perspective. So yeah, I think I was looking for a visual artist for a time because, like, you don't have any knowledge of what comic books are, what this universe is. You just have an idea of, I think I can do this. And
Yeah.
I think I aimed for Aquaman. I was like, just be better than Aquaman. Like if I can just be better than Aquaman, you know. So that was the intro. Just aim for like
Right,
the
right,
basic hero. Don't try and take on the big guys.
right,
Just
right,
slot yourself in there. So
right.
yeah, I look for visual artists to represent the artwork, and I realized it's a very collaborative project. You can't
100%.
um
100%.
Yeah, it just happened that as I was pitching the idea that my brother was able to illustrate the story. So yeah, from there I was like, you know what, we need a vehicle to take this comic book. Why don't you actually step back and say, because it was so hard for you to find the resources to create the story, even if it might take you another 5, 10 years, at least you have the expertise to say, this is how you do it, you know.
Right,
So
right,
yeah, it's been a challenge since 2018. We put together, the company, the concept of where we want to go, and I think it
right.
was more than anything saying, go through the journey, get that knowledge, like that experience, put it together, and so at some point you can be like a wealth of knowledge for the next comic book artists that come after. So I think looking forward to the future, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity to impart that knowledge to the next generation and look
100%.
for one day creating an African aesthetic, an African style, if, something that Americans will be like, you know what, the way that people want Japanese comic books, sorry, Japanese manga, even though there's American comics, having
Mm.
our own style of content.
Right,
So I think
right.
there's a long-term trajectory that we're also aiming for.
I'm glad you guys have a long-term idea, because to me it means that you're creating something that's gonna outlive you. When I look at people like Walt Disney or Stan Lee, they're no
Yeah,
longer with us,
yeah,
but
yeah,
the characters still live on. And I think also what I like about you guys is you've created a character that is based on a real life, iconic hero. It's not the actual person, but he represents what that person's way of life was. And for that, I think you're also bringing life, um, or the life of Mandela into this character, which is
yeah,
something that I think we should still continue, because I feel like a part of him has truly left us, and we're not really feeling that Madiba magic anymore in the country. But having a character like
yeah,
Young Nelson can bring that back, and what I like about you guys as well is that you have called this company Rainbow Nation Comics, which is something that I
yeah,
feel like it's lacking nowadays. I feel like we're
yeah,
being more separate again, like back then. And a company like yours can actually inspire the youth to say, guys, please let's not shift away from the idea that Mandela had.
yeah,
So I'm grateful for that. So. Um, I just wanted to know, what's your approach to illustrating, and how do you come about these characters? Because I know character design can be something a bit tricky. You can come up with a character
Yeah,
and then only find out that, oh, there's a character that looks like this already. How's your approach?
yeah,
Ompile, how's your approach?
yeah. I think it's been the 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 initial young Northern character was very organic. Was more like doodling, because I kind of dabble in a lot of stuff from like marketing or often on Canva. So putting like the backgrounds together, almost like scrapbooking, if it makes
Oh,
sense.
okay.
So around the time that Pamela came up to me with the idea, just hearing the music, visually I kind of had an idea of, like certain things, certain panels. But at the time, I hadn't studied comic books,
Mm.
so but I was doing like visual art, like traditional pencil to paper. So in my head, I had just thought, okay, comic books are kind of like, you know, artwork, individual artworks, just in sequence. So that kind of like how I decided to almost start to break down the concept of comic books and really start to engage, the concept from that point of view.
So,
So so then the young Nelson character comes up from that, from referencing material. At the time we started off, we had like a very chubby like character. He looked more like in his 40s almost, So
oh,
kind of
yeah,
like,
yeah.
no, no,
So how's this
we
young?
need to trim it down.
How is he a young guy if he looks like he's in full? I
Yeah,
get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. So
yeah,
yeah.
and that's the thing, like, like I'm saying, I started off as a traditional artist. So in my head,
Sure.
I'm doing portraits. I'm usually trying to get the likeness to it.
Right,
So when he's
right.
telling me about young Nelson, I'm referencing, Nelson Mandela and then trying to get the likeness from there. So that's when now the collaboration comes in. Where he's like, no, no, trim him down a bit. No, he does boxing, so try and get a six pack in there. So
Sure.
that's how then, yeah. So that's how we then get closer to sorry. That's how we then get closer to the character.
Right, right.
So sorry. We
Sorry about that.
yeah, we just
It's okay. I understand. Mm.
family.
No, no problem.
But yeah, so then we then start to break down the character from there, you know. And I think at the time he let me know in terms of like the armor, you know, that he would have kind of like the bulletproof type thing going on.
Mm.
But then we were thinking, but it shouldn't be like heavy. It shouldn't be militant. It should
Right,
be, you know,
right.
more, you know, colorful. You know, so that's where like the back and forth comes in until we chip away at it and we find something that's working. And then
I think the look we were going for is like the wisdom of Nelson meets like the physical mannerisms of a Muhammad Ali.
yeah,
So if
Right.
you imagine a young Nelson, you know, the movement, the energy, the style. So
Mm.
yeah, and I think at the end of the day, if you look at most comic book stories, it's always about referencing people that inspire us. You know, if you
100%.
look at the Superman, the Batmans, there's a lot of
Right.
European heroes that are in those stories. Yeah.
100%.
so
Yeah, I do like
yes,
the costume. It's not cheesy. It's not some guy wearing spandex or something, which is there's nothing wrong with that. But I like the fact that
Yeah.
you have incorporated the South African flag into it. And it looks like something
yeah,
that someone can actually do. Like you can find someone who can actually go to Comic Con wearing that suit. And you
yeah,
know, one thing I've noticed about American comic book characters is that they somewhat have the American flag, but sometimes it's subtle.
Ooh.
When you look at Captain
yeah,
Yeah.
America,
Yeah.
there's a star, there's blue, there's red, there's white. You know, Superman, there's red, there's
Yeah.
white. Spider-Man, there's red, there's blue. Sorry, Superman, red, blue as well. So you can see that there's some, you know, so with you guys, I like the fact that you also incorporate that sort of thing. So I wanted to ask you guys, in terms of the business, because I do understand that you guys are creators, you know, you're a writer and you're an artist, but you're also a businessman. Do you guys get funding or are you just, is everything self-funded? Because when I went to Comic Con, you guys have had like merchandise and pull-up banners and t-shirt, branded t-shirts. I'm like, yo, where do these guys, you know, how do they go about this, you know? Um, and
Yeah.
obviously you
I
had to
think
buy
so.
tickets or something to get there and you had to use petrol, so there's a cost element to it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd
Mm,
say most of it is self-funded. I think we got initial support from like the what do you call this? The Rustenburg Herald, you know.
yes.
And then I think from there it's been, you know, kind of discussions around, you know, licensing, you know, all of but it's
Mm,
really behind you can't really go further than, you know, you've pushed an NDA, you know. But as
right.
far as funding and support, you get to Comic Con by yourself, you get there by yourself. There's always a lot of interest from brands, a lot of interest, but you need to kind of come back with a lot of I guess skin in the game, if I could say. You know,
Right.
there's a lot of credibility you need to build as a brand before you're able to get that long-term support.
No, that's true. And then in terms of your writing, are there any other people that you look up to
Yeah.
with that regard? Because I know in some of your interviews you've mentioned people like Stan Lee,
Yeah.
you've mentioned Jack Kirby,
Yeah.
you know, and to me it shows that you're really informed about the space that you're in. Do you look up to those guys when you
Yeah.
come up with your stories?
Yeah, I try and read. There's a resource. I think it's comic book or comic scripts archive. I look at like the scripts from like Alan Moore. You know,
Yes,
I look at
yes,
the works of Todd McFarlane. I
right.
try and see like the structure. You know, obviously, then my attempt was always to say write it yourself and then
Yeah.
study the grades after. Because sometimes it feels like when I come up with an idea, and or rather when I've read an idea, then I don't come up with an original idea. I then try and now replicate it, you know. So there's been a lot
Mm,
of choices where I said, you know what, write it first, then
mm,
study the material. So for
mm.
example, Stan Lee once said like it's important to start with the superpower first and then the
Right.
characters like backstory. But I went the other way. I'm like, well, this guy has to first function in a South African
Mm,
context. then
Right.
whatever power he has will make sense, you know. So I think
Yeah.
there's also personal choices that you make that, for better or worse, at least I think
Mm.
will make you an original character, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you
And I
can't.
think there's a bit of
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
so yeah.
I wanted to say you can't have young Nelson shooting webs. Kukasi. It would make no sense, you know.
Yeah. And that's why I thought if he's a real person, you know, if it's a person who's, for example, has abilities that the next person can achieve, you know,
Right. Right.
then it inspires you to be like, look, if I work out, if I train, if I eat healthy, if I study, if I, you know, I think there's people around you who can do superhuman things, you know,
Right. Right.
athletes, geniuses who I think can I mean one of young Nelson's abilities is the ability to read really fast, you know. So I think that's a
Right.
thing that I think young people can aspire to have. Like if I can read
Mm.
an engineering book or a set of engineering books in a year, in 2 years,
Right.
you know, I can be that, you know. So I think it's one of those things that if they can see, I always looked at it this way. I feel like one of the reasons why Europeans can go into ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient times and actually study that environment and feel comfortable is vicariously they can go there. In that time, there wasn't a Europe, you know, there wasn't
Yeah.
really a Britain until, you know, the Romans moved in. And my
Right.
thing is, if we as Africans could go into any space and time, whether it's into deep space, we can see ourselves as astronauts. If we could move into time travel in history and study our, you know, ancestors, how they built, you know, civilization. I think sometimes one of the reasons we can't go back in history is because you can't see yourself. Like either you're
Hmm.
always seeing like slave stories, so you're
Yeah.
like, it's traumatic, come back,
Right.
you know. You
Right.
just want to
Right.
be here, you know. So
Right.
you almost need a vicarious vehicle that takes you there, you know.
That
So
is
it's like
true.
sometimes
Mm.
you need a superhero in space, superhero in ancient times, you know.
Mm.
I used to
Mm.
like her, you know,
Yeah.
and then I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't see myself in ancient Greece, you
Right.
know. But
Right. Right.
study about Memnon, you know, an ancient Ethiopian king, I'm like, who moved through ancient time and space. I'm like, oh, okay, my ancestors were there. There's a,
There's a
you know, we're
story there.
here, so it's good
Mm.
enough. Yeah,
Yeah, because I was thinking
yeah,
about this earlier on that I think what makes you guys stand out is that look, I don't know if I've told you guys, I'm also a comic book creator, writer, illustrator, and all those things.
right, right. Mm,
My cousin and I started this thing like in 2004, actually 2002 to be specific. And
mm,
but one thing I like about you guys is um, look, we grew up watching your diehards, Van Damme, Steven Seagal,
yeah,
all these guys. And when you watch
yeah,
South African content, it's usually like a father who is an abusive guy, drinks alcohol, has issues, is a womanizer.
yeah,
So we looked up to
yeah,
these Western heroes. So I'm glad
yeah,
that you guys have taken our actual South African heroes and you're pushing that agenda forward so that we can look up to people from the country instead of looking at
yeah.
people overseas and aspiring to be people like people overseas. I'd be interested. I don't know. How are you guys incorporating some of our culture into the comics? Are we seeing like the young Nelson eating spark or scorp or amascopas or something? Is that something that people can look forward to while they're reading the comics?
Yeah, I think in the long run we want to have him have, you know, like if you look at Goku, how he's always eating quite a bit.
Right.
I thought one of the things that people with
Mm.
these abilities have is that they have a high metabolism.
Right.
So I think once the, you know, the organizations that are responsible for kind of keeping track of, you know, diet and so forth will look at making sure we have a very African diet for the different
Mm.
characters. But
For sure.
I
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think what we're trying to do, I think also like you're saying, how are we Africanizing the content, I guess, you know, from the
Mm.
food to the
Right.
aesthetics to the
Right.
language to,
Right.
you know,
Music.
yeah, the music.
Right.
And I think there's from the apparel that the guys wear, we're trying to
Mm.
strike a balance between kind of just throwing on, you know, like the tribal apparel and
Right.
also having the, you know, the balance between like the modern you know,
Mm.
dress. So
Mm.
For example, aesthetically, we're bringing in images of, the African patterns,
Yes.
into like now what Nelson wears. And yeah, slowly but surely, you're right. There will be the food that we bring in, whether ke mohodu, whether ke,
Sure. Sure.
spatlo.
Yeah.
I guess it's
Yeah.
one of those things to say, let it flow. I
Right.
think sometimes the challenge is you wanna Africanize the content so quickly that you forget the story.
Yeah, you don't want to
And I
force
think
it.
if we
Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
One of
Mm.
the things is like kind of saying let's get the story down, and then
Right.
almost like the African concept almost takes care of itself. Because like you
Mm.
imagine in dialogue, which is what I say when I write scripts, it's like you're slowing down your conversation,
Mm.
because you're not
Mm.
thinking, what did I say to my brother yesterday? And you're like, oh, I said ba 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 ba, and then if you write that conversation down, that's pretty much the script for the comic book. So
Right.
hopefully like a Swan and then you mixed it with some English. Because I realized the first thing I try to do is like this has to be Swan. But then I'm
Right.
like, maybe let me make it as natural a
Mm.
conversation as possible. And I think
Mm.
maybe that's the battle you have as an artist. Like how African can you make it? You
Right.
take time slowly to make it natural as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I
Mm.
think it's a work in progress. But
Mm.
we're willing to
Mm.
always take critique as people are like, you know what? Maybe, for example, when Nelson goes to another dimension, there should be an ancient African Hearts or ancient Egypt. So we're
Right.
listening to listen, willing to listen and kind of as we plan for the future,
Mm.
incorporate more of what we think the audience also wants to see.
But I guess if the audience is that invested in your IP, then that means that you have
Yeah.
something great happening there. Because if you have people interested in giving you ideas, it surely means that they love what you guys are doing. So I think it's a good thing. It's definitely a good thing. So shout out, shout out
Yeah.
for that.
I mean, sometimes the beauty of kind of putting your idea out, like you said, because like you want to put your comic or you're working on your comic book, putting it out there, you actually get ways to improve your work from the
Right,
audience. Like there was
right.
someone who told us, look, change the cover because Nelson was just standing there one time. He's like, have more
Oh,
like of a active cover, have action,
right,
and then we
right,
have Nelson falling on the cover,
right.
and next one he's actually his face is dramatic. And then the
Mm,
one
mm.
lady's like, when we had Comic Con, a white lady was like, once I told her the pitch for Young Nelson, the story, she's like, just so make the villain white. And then she kept working, and you know, and I'm like, I wasn't planning to, but
Right,
thanks.
right, right,
So I
right.
think it also let me understand like also her concerns, like
Yeah,
and I think
right,
the
right.
beauty of storytelling is that it's a conversation starter. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it allows us to say, hey, how do we actually come together and talk about heroism and talk about the social ills without
right.
making it about race, without making it about
Mm,
individuals, but about solutions.
right,
So yeah, I
right.
hope as the stories keep continuing to be told, young people reading it slowly but surely, more and more people hearing about the story. I think there's that critical mass that you build from, that
Mm,
longevity that I
right,
think you do have to take it step by step.
for
Yeah.
sure. Ompila, you've mentioned
Yeah.
in some of your interviews that you read manga. So I just wanted to know, what's your take on manga versus American comics? I know there's a big difference between the two in terms of, I mean, for instance, with manga, Shonen Jump, they release their material on a weekly basis and it's black and white. Whereas Americans, I
Mm.
think they release monthly, which is colored and everything.
Yeah.
But what do you think? Which do you think is more effective in your approach to drawing? Which one do you like more?
Oh man, I've been studying both. I've been a fan of both.
Mm, mm,
Uh, Pros and cons.
mm.
Um, yeah, man, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
That's a tough
yeah.
one. I'd say the US, like commercially, I think comic books uh they get it right, and then I
Okay.
think with Japanese storytelling, character development,
Mm,
um they're too visual. I think they get that right. I mean, you can watch Death Note like
Hey,
you can
Death Note is crazy. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
classic.
and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I like about the Japanese. Like they tell one story once, and Naruto is done, it's complete. You can go back to it, a lot.
Right,
Um,
right.
what I appreciate with the Japanese and manga and then comic books. I mean, you can rewrite Batman's story 1,000 times and craft it 1,000 times.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, but it still moves in terms of the
Unit
cinema and
sales.
ticket. So it's if you're a comic book creator, you kind of uh, sift through both and kind of look at the pros and cons and then see how
Mm,
that applies to the market like South Africa. So that's I guess what I've been able to do besides my brother, just try to
sure.
find that balance. So it's a tough
Okay.
one, man, but that's the best way I can answer it.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, but it's good to
Yeah,
have a balance between the Eastern and the Western, I guess. They sort of complement each other. And
yeah,
I've
yeah,
also witnessed that you guys are also, from a business perspective, you're also conscious of spreading your IP in different ways. I think you have mentioned that you have an audio book, if I'm not mistaken, and you have some
Yeah.
merchandise. So to me, it seems like there's probably going to be an animated series, a live action series, or film in the long run, or games, or some of the things like that. Are you guys also planning to do those things in the future?
Yeah, I think we're always looking and reaching out to, potential partnerships, potential collaborations. And yeah, I think obviously, there's a lot of conversation that has to take place. So it's not a straightforward, hey, we like your idea, here's money. There's a lot of kind
Yeah,
of where is the story going? And I
yeah.
think most importantly, I've realized people want to see numbers. People want to see what are the social media
Right,
numbers looking like.
right, right,
How many
right,
issues do you have out?
right.
What is the response? So it's almost like you need to first of all, I came in this like, can I do a comic book? Like
Mm,
once you've done a comic book, wow, this is a really great story. When's the next issue coming out? And you're like,
ish.
wow. Like the first script was based on. I literally moved from writing a song, converting it into a comic book script, right? I've
Right,
studied
right.
public relations, so I know how to write. But I realized writing for a comic book script is a very specific format because the
Mm,
artist is almost like if you don't write it well, the artist can't take it over, you know.
yeah, yeah.
So I realized I need to, for example, you need to name where the sound effects come in. You need to name when which character speaks. It's a script like for a movie, but I think
Mm,
there's that little animation element that takes place. But
right.
because really in comic books you can do anything,
Mm,
you almost have to kind of calm yourself down, and it's actually rather condensing your ideas to this one issue, then
yes.
getting ready for the next issue and condensing. So it's not that I don't have enough ideas. It's actually
Yeah,
I realize, oh, you have so many ideas. You need to condense them into one issue and the
right.
next issue and take it one issue at a time. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I think from what I've observed is that we have a lot of creativity, a lot of stories. Like we've got a lot of beautiful, like you said, aesthetics as
Mm,
African people. A
mm,
lot of characters, folklore
mm,
that I think could be adapted into comic book content. That I've realized, there's the opportunity for me to kind of take all that I'm learning and then kind of compile it into like a methodology of how do you actually in an African context write comic books. So I'm
right.
taking the time to say, okay, how do you juxtapose your indigenous language with English? Because in an American comic book,
Mm,
you just read in English. you
right,
know. So
right.
I think there's nuances that you also learn as you're working to say like, how do you reference cultural aesthetics without kind of being cliche? Because you've
Mm,
been
mm,
critiquing Western culture for being very cliche and being very simplistic in
mm,
how they reflect your culture. Now
yeah,
you have to reinterpret that culture as well. So
right.
yeah, I think there's a lot of personal growth that also takes place as you write stories, because
Yeah,
also stories are reflections of yourself. So
right.
you also have to do a lot of, well,
You
I never
know,
thought I felt like that. Yeah. So yeah,
sorry. You know what I would like to see? I would like to
yeah.
see young Nelson being screened in Japan or America or Canada, you
Yeah,
know, Sundance
yeah,
Film Festival, and I think it is highly possible because one thing I've realized about the Western culture, even the Eastern, is as long as we are authentic and we give them what we believe is great, they'll love it. I mean,
yeah,
you saw with how Jerusalem was big. You see how the
mhm,
Amapiano wave is killing it. And I believe that
yeah,
once we do that and give it out to the people, it would be great. I mean, don't be shocked if Disney knocks on your door, or don't be shocked if Warner Brothers knocks
yeah,
on your door. And it's
Yeah.
yeah,
gonna come to my next question to you guys that if a big company comes to you guys and says, guys, we want to buy this thing, we've got $1 billion, we want to buy this thing, would you be willing to sell to sell this thing, or would you be willing to say, would you just say, no, we're fine, we're just gonna do our own thing, even if it takes as long as it takes, we're still gonna what would
I
you
think
do?
there's because there's a whole philosophy behind the character. I think there's a whole industry that can be born from the character. We do not have in South Africa a comic book publishing industry.
Yes.
And I think it's a double-edged sword because what you need for the industry to grow is you need funding. So I
Right.
think there's a difference between saying, hey, here's 50 million, give me young Nelson, and hey, I realize there's no comic book publishing industry in South Africa. I want to invest in developing it. I've seen that you've already taken the first steps in that direction. You
Right.
understand the market to some extent.
Right.
I'd like to invest in maybe getting you to be like on a quarterly basis, building your
Right.
team So I think there's a discussion that can take place around that because at the end of the day, if somebody said we want to buy Young Nelson for 1 billion and close it down, I mean, does that make sense?
No, it
So
doesn't.
I think
No.
yeah, I think the logic is if somebody's coming in to help grow the brand, we would be willing to listen.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm, mm. I guess what I meant by that is you see how Zuckerberg would buy Instagram because he's afraid that it was going to take over Facebook, or so
yeah,
if these guys then come because they're afraid that young Nelson is going to, because I mean, let's be honest, Mandela is an icon, right? And
yeah,
once people who are interested in knowing more about young Nelson because he might expose certain things about Mandela that they didn't know. Like you guys have mentioned in some of your previous interviews that not everybody knows that Mandela was a boxer, for example. So now you have these
yeah,
people now so interested in the South African comic that they're actually not even buying Batman and Superman. All they want is just to get more of young Nelson because they're so invested. They've been reading Batman comics for 25 years. They've been reading manga for 25 years, but
yeah.
now they want. So if something like that, I guess my question to you guys is if there's ever going to be a moment where there's pressure from the audience for you guys to actually put out more issues, would you be then interested in actually hiring more staff and making sure that you get these things a lot quicker, despite the funds available? Would you do that?
Yeah, I think we've been looking at ways to kind of grow our rather increase our productivity.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is, you don't want to kind of sell somebody a dream and be like, hey man,
Mm,
tomorrow this comic book is gonna blow up. Trust
yeah.
us,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
I think it's a very delicate balance between kind of understanding the market and saying, okay, what is the methodology? I think there's a period of time like you're experimenting, like
Mm,
engaging with media, engaging with different stakeholders to be like, would these guys buy it if there was a team to produce this on a quarterly? Because
right.
so I think at this phase, personally, I've been in an information gathering phase. And I'm not against building the team. I think it's obviously part of the trajectory. It's the long
100%.
term goal to be,
So,
yeah. I would say like it's almost like you're in the almost like in the proof of product or proof of
mm,
proof of product phase. And
right.
once you've now realized at Comic Con the books sell out, when you make merch they sell out, you know. So you know that this book sells out. You now need to say, are you going to invest this much in distribution? How much are you going to invest in merch? How
Mm,
many more comic books are you going to publish?
right.
Are you willing to invest in it? So I think all of those questions you kind of, because at the end of the day, as a small business, you one bad move, one bad investment,
Hey, yeah,
can make the
can
whole brand
destroy.
kind of
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah
yeah, but I also think that's like been what we looked at as like the benefit of being a small company right now, so that you can explore and experiment without like the pressure at all. Like it's
There's
an
room for
issue.
mistakes. Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
like we
Yeah.
know with what we can do, what we can't do.
Mm,
And then now
mm,
it's just about like building the resources, the capabilities, so that we know like okay, we're going for the jugular, like everything safe. So I think when you're looking at where you are, you kind of look at the pros and cons. With all the finances were there, maybe you would have invested in it and it could have blown up, or it just wasn't the time for it. So it's one of those. Yeah, so I think that's like the doing like your research, where you are as a company, what are your opportunities, where are and what's against you. And I think you can almost look at those pluses and minuses and say, okay, that's the best way for the brand to go for now.
mm.
So yeah, I think it's a balance. But I think that's how you can also able to weigh it out, like more of an organic process than, you know,
Yeah. And I guess it gives you guys an opportunity to know your business in and out before anybody else can come in. Um,
yeah,
you would be more clued up than anybody else. So that's a good thing. I
yeah
wanted, I see we're running out of time, but I wanted us to talk a bit about Mama Africa because I find it to be quite a fascinating character. Someone who has
yeah
power or is able to give another individual powers, but she's broke. Like, I mean, she needed, money for transportation, and young Nelson is the one that's giving her this money. And I think it speaks
yeah
to some of our situations in the country. You find, like you said, you guys were saying in a previous interview that young Nelson is unemployed, but he's smart and
yeah
he's a fighter.
yeah
You have
yeah
these. I guess you could say it's this dichotomy of having such
yeah
potential that is not recognized or that is not being utilized in a proper sense. So I just wanted to know what can we get from Mama Africa? I believe she's probably going to be a prominent character within the comic. And is there a message
yeah
that we will be getting about motherhood or about mentorship from that character throughout the comic?
Yeah, I think for me, what I've realized about our culture is, like I was saying, we have the power, or we have, if you look at our culture, it's one of the very few, maybe I could be corrected, but names are very important,
Mm,
right? And
mm,
it's like the names that your mother gives you, the names that your father gives you, the names that you get in your family,
yeah,
are terms of endearment, you
right,
know.
right,
And I think for me, took from my own grandmother that I think there's lessons that she taught me that I realized, they say it takes a village to raise a child, you
right,
know.
right.
So yeah, the grandmother is almost like the symbol of the village, right? Or like
True.
the teacher of the village. The
Right,
father is like the foundation, you
right,
know. But I
right.
saw the grandmother, like Africans don't put their grandmothers away in old age homes,
That's true.
because
That's
there's
true.
some sense of, yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
value that grandmothers have that is not physical. It's not a boxer's strength,
yeah,
it's the
yeah,
ability to look after the kids when the
yeah.
men are going to work, you know.
Nurturing.
It's
Mm,
the ability to, yeah, because you don't know how many kids that, for example, if because everybody acknowledges the NGOs that fund projects and so forth, but
mm,
or people that run childcare centers, but grandmothers who look after intergenerational communities.
mm,
They're not bodybuilders. They're not
yeah,
athletes. They're not politicians.
yeah.
But what they give you is the opportunity to raise the next generation.
It's
And
true.
without the next generation, without young Nelson, you don't have doctors, engineers.
Um, Sorry about that. These um Zoom, it can only speak for like 45 minutes or something. And I think it's jealous. It's like, as we're having this great conversation, just cuts.
Yeah,
Sorry about that. Can we just continue? You're talking about the
yeah,
importance of a mother figure in society. How
yeah,
they nurture the kids, and these are some of the lessons that they impart on the kids, are some of the lessons that we um we take with us as we
yeah,
get older, kind of like an Uncle Ben in Spider-Man, but for our society, which is
yeah,
the mothers. Yeah, yeah. Can you please continue with what you were saying?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And I think there's obviously everybody's got a personal relationship with their grandmother that's different. But I think there's
Right.
certain things that we take of if you think about it, the concept of like voto and treating other people as you want to be treated and all those things, and
Mm.
kind of like the importance of it, you kind of learn it from the maternal side. Not that that your father doesn't teach you those lessons as well.
Mm,
I don't
mm,
know. For me personally, my grandmother was the one always kind of repeating over and over again the biblical messages, the
mm,
morals. So
mm.
yeah, I think also as we go slowly but surely, there will be kind of opportunities to show the world African characters,
Right,
like we've said,
right.
how the importance of the grandmother, the
Mm,
uncle,
mm,
the importance of family, the importance of building community. So yeah, I
mm,
think
mm.
that's how we kind of envision the importance of imparting names also onto children that are positive, you know.
Right, right.
So yeah, I think there's a metaphor that we want to continue through the Mama Africa character consistently throughout the universe.
Okay, no, awesome, man. Thanks for that. I just want to take it back a bit. You had a job and you were caught researching comics, and that led to
Yeah,
you getting fired from that specific job.
yeah,
What were you Googling exactly at the time, and how did you feel about, getting let go of something that you were so passionate
yeah.
about?
Yeah, I was Googling specifically a character for one of potential clients. So it was basically like using the whole concept of the fourth industrial revolution within, basically an Iron Man type of character. So I was kind
Mm,
of seeing, different designs, different ideas that
mm,
you could play around with there. So yeah, I think it was one of those things where um, yeah, I understood the logic behind that that process of saying, okay, look, you're not invested in this.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I think at the same time, I was like, you know what? I was in two minds. One of the things I was thinking about is like, there's an opportunity to start a project in publishing, in comic book publishing. I'm at a printing space. I'm not hired specifically to do this skill set. So
mm.
it's one of those things where you're kind of weighing it up, and slowly but surely, as you're kind of looking at your vision, you have to choose one or the other. And yeah, I think it was one of those things where there's a moment where I was comfortable with. It's almost like the decision made. Not I made the decision, and like
Mm.
everything that happened after that was all kind of meant to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
it was meant to be.
yeah,
You were meant to
yeah. I
do
mean,
that at that time, and your boss was supposed to catch you, and so that you can
yeah.
actually go out and do this thing full time, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've just thought about like how many people, lost their jobs during COVID. I thought about how,
Yeah,
you could like there's like nothing in life is guaranteed. And I
100%.
think if I think I'd love to have stayed and built, my financial resources. And I mean, there's the ideal way to do it. If you can build yourself up and work towards your dream, do it
Mm,
that way. If you can set a timeline, say in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, I'm gonna
mm,
save up, and then on this day, I'm gonna invest in it, or
mm,
I'm gonna test it while I'm working. It's great.
right.
But should you be in a situation where things don't allow you or things aren't ideal, I think you should still do whatever it takes to live out your dream, because you only get
Mm,
one life.
right,
And
right.
yeah, So yeah, I think everything was meant to be. I thank God for the opportunity because I learned the printing industry. I saw how everything
Wow.
works. So now
Wow.
I know paper grammages. I know what
Yes.
how I know the
CMYK.
different yeah, I
Yeah.
know the different competitors to my so because I don't just study the company I work for, I also study the competitors. I now
Right.
know if I want to be, suppliers, who to contact. So I
Mm,
think that's the other thing. Like when you leave an organization, you at least you will always have the knowledge of how that organization functions. And I think
yeah.
that's a gift. If you have the courage to start, you can actually start your own printing project. Maybe just create your own brand, have your own
Right.
aesthetic, your own style. So yeah, I think maybe that could also be something we also learn as Africans to say, like maybe we should start our own stuff.
Mm,
Maybe we should have our own organizations. Yeah.
right. Right. Okay. I have two questions about conflict. The first one I'll ask. Um, so as the creative director, my brother, do you sometimes have conflict with your brother? You're like maybe you're reading something and like, you know what? No, I think we should take this out, and then maybe you guys disagree about a certain concept or a certain part of the story. Maybe you feel like, I don't think young Nelson would do this, and he's like, no, 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 young Nelson would do this. How do you guys deal with that? Because in as much as you guys are aligned, I'm sure there are some clashes here and there. Even though they're not serious things, it's just maybe minor things that you guys want to tweak. How do you guys deal
Yeah.
with that? How do you deal with that?
Um, well, yeah, I think maybe like I've got a different default setting, but um, like the project needs to get across the finish line.
Right.
So we can either um uh and for me that's what I mean. Like we can, because it's a very collaborative process. Like when we started the comic book
Right.
company, like I let them know, like, no one in our family has built a comic book publishing company before. So it's gonna be
Yeah,
the
this is
first
new.
time we're
Mm,
doing this.
mm,
So there's no
mm,
like right or wrong way to do it.
mm.
But like the best idea needs to come to the top.
Right.
So, and what I wish, like, I wasn't a good debater, but like
Okay.
what I wish, um, like how I wish people would solve like conflict would be like for debates, like for the best argument to, or
Mm,
best point to be refined, like chip away at it
right.
until, and we've got other siblings as well. So if like we're
Okay.
stuck on like an idea, we kind of bring it to everybody. Like, okay, guys, this is the idea. Chip
All
away at
right.
it, ask questions, criticize it here because it's going to go to the outside world, and it's better
Right.
like it gets criticized and chipped away at here and now.
Right. Right.
And I cry about it, but it's the right way forward.
Mm,
Then like I'm like, I think young Nelson would do this, and then it just ruins the story forever. So for me, like that's my approach to like any
mm,
project I've ever done. Like at the
mm,
at the end, anything you do, like, and I think you remember, like when you get to varsity, like your when you get your perspective, your test dates are almost there, like for September even, and you just January. So like the test date is gonna happen on unless something happens. September, you're writing the test, so it's like
yeah.
you can either be as prepared for it as possible, or just kind of get by. So for me, it's that, like, the project, when it's time for people to see it, and it needs to be at a certain quality. So that day is gonna come. Like now, we just need to chip away at it now until you know. So I think that's the other thing. Yeah, I could go on about that point, but like that's the best way to like resolve conflict for the audience. The For me, like from what I've learned with marketing, is that like the idea is always going to remain new. Like for the first person that's going to see Young Nelson, it's going to be new, to them. Obviously until like it's a household name, and like you
Mm,
can't,
right.
an episode can't come out without anybody seeing it. So it's better like to take your time so that when people see it, it's what's supposed to
Mm,
be in front of them and not rushed to get in front of them. So that's
Mm,
like my default setting for any project I approach. It's like what's best for it,
mm,
Yeah, and then I guess he will let you know from his side maybe how when there
yeah,
is a conflict, how he kind of processes it.
sure. Okay, before we go to him,
Yeah,
I just want to say that I'm glad that you're open-minded about that approach and that you are being objective about um, dealing with conflict in that respect. Because as you have mentioned earlier on, you said that the story is more important than anything. So I'm glad that you have
yeah,
set your ego aside to say, okay, let's get other parties who can actually tell us the truth about which
yeah,
direction this story can go. So I think that's a good trait for you
yeah. Like
as a
yeah,
creative
like
director.
there's
Mm,
yeah, there's a lot of perspective on like an idea.
yeah,
Like there's a lot
yeah,
of ways of seeing. So even just taking the time out to hear all of them out, I think
right.
the best thing. Like just from the research perspective, and that's what I'm saying. Like that's why I'm able to appreciate the Japanese for that. Like they can take their time to give you a product that ages well and
Mm,
done.
mm,
I think if
mm,
you take your time with with your ideas, like they age well in that way. And it's like no one else is gonna take the time to do that. So why don't you just kind of
right,
take the time
right,
to do it yourself?
right.
That's that's almost like the thought process.
Yeah. And then Pimeno, what's
Anyway,
your how do you deal with conflict with your brother on certain
Yeah,
projects?
I think the logic is pretty much similar. It's reasoning out and then putting it forward to a third party to say, okay, well, I the merits of this decision is ABC, whether it's a deadline, whether it's, a creative decision to say, I believe this is the best course of action because of ABC. And sometimes it's one of those things where, you have to say, look, uh, I don't know. We both don't know what's the best course of action. And
Wow.
we have to
Okay.
say, you know, so I think that's the thing is like you're saying, because it's uncharted territory,
Mm,
there's those decisions where you're like, um, whatever happens, this is the best with the information we have at our disposal, this is the
right,
best course of action.
right.
So I think every decision we make, we're learning. But yeah, for
Mm,
me, it's that to say, look, at the end of the day, I could either be right and have a product that's compromised, that's below par, or
mm,
I could accept for as far as visual representation. There's a blind spot that I don't have. I can write the best story that I can write, but if
right.
the illustrator tells me this backflip won't work because anatomically it doesn't look right,
Mm,
I have to
mm,
accept that
right,
vision. So I
right.
think there's a collaboration between the artist and it's almost like a producer and a rapper. Like if you told a
Mm,
producer as an MC that you want the double kick right next to each other, and the
right.
producer told you it's not gonna sound right,
Yeah,
you have to
yeah.
trust. You know,
Mm,
yeah, so I end up just saying, you know what, this is my vision for the story. This is where I see it going. And visually, if there's a limitation, then I will then go and rewrite the story to then fit within the skill set or the vision of the artistic representation. So it's the
right.
trial and error or like a back and forth. And you just have to accept also within the constraint of deadlines, what can be done.
Mm,
So I think there's also variables to take in like resources, other projects that are running at the time. So
mm,
yeah, I think at the end of the day, you end up stepping back and saying, with the resources at your disposal, what is the best product you can produce?
right.
Time,
yeah.
personal
And
commitments.
I,
Yeah.
and I think like the other thing I've learned is like, every company is building the plane while it's in the air. Like even if it's been at it for like 30 years, like there's still a lot of communication, conflict, back and
Right,
forth. It's just because it's been up
right.
there for 30 years, it looks like it's good to go. So
Yeah.
I think that's like for me the best way I've learned to look at it. Like we're all building the plane while it's still in the air. So um,
Mm,
you know,
mm,
just to just to be yeah, just to be mindful of it, like there's a lot of input that goes into it.
sure.
So yeah, I think that's maybe the best way we can uh, I guess approach that, you know,
Sure.
those times, like, you know, unsure about which direction to go.
Okay, the other question that I wanted to ask you guys is about conflict within the story. Um, I do know that usually when we write stories, the conflict is normally between the protagonist and the antagonist, you know, Goku versus Frieza or Captain America versus Thanos. But then you also have
Yeah.
internal conflicts between some of your main characters, and I wanted to know, in a position where I don't know if this is a complex question, but I'm just curious as an audience that should there be conflict between Mama Africa and young Nelson? Would Mama Africa then strip off the power that she gave young Nelson? You know, kind of like with Thor when Thor's dad took the hammer away and said, you know what, you're not worthy anymore,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
gonna give it away to someone else who's worthy. Is that something we can expect in the comic? Is Mama Africa capable of taking back the power that she had granted young Nelson? Should they have conflict?
I I wouldn't want that to be possible,
Mm,
because it would mean that she's a bad judge of character, which
right,
goes against one of her traits, which is
right.
that she can judge character. But I guess every
Oh,
citizen has free choice. So it would be impossible to tell a good story if Nelson didn't have free choice. So
mm,
I think what I think is important is that when it's almost like when God gives us power, He gives all
yes,
human beings the power to do good,
right,
but we have the free will to do evil. And I
right.
think that's kind of like how I see any gift that we have, the gift of life, the power of the word,
Right.
we can use our words to uplift others and encourage others. So I see the gift of Mama Africa like that is that it's a gift that when she's giving it to you, it's for yours to do what you believe is best, you know.
Mm, mm,
Um, so I think the main thing might be that we learn that Mama Africa has not just given the power, not necessarily the power or the name just to Nelson, but there's many other people she's engaged with, and
mm,
imparted wisdom in different ways.
right.
So maybe what we might find is that there might be jealousy from those who might not have gotten the same training or the
Mm,
same gift as
mm,
Nelson. But I
mm,
don't think the conflict I don't think won't come between Mama Africa and Nelson, but maybe other characters who've engaged with Mama Africa, and maybe the
mm,
questioning of why Nelson, why him.
mm,
So I think
mm.
that's more
Hey,
the angle that I
that's
would.
interesting. That's
I would
interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting.
yeah.
And
So I,
yeah,
I think when we follow Mama Africa back and start to question like her thought process for choosing Nelson, that's where we then get to unpack that. Maybe
right,
there have been many more other suitors who have been, examined and not found worthy. And
right.
those are potential, you know, rivals.
And this I see this thing, it actually relates with us as human beings, as a country. Okay, wait, before I go there, I just want to say I like what you said about God. I think there's a scripture that says the gifts of God are without repentance or something like that. Once He has given you that gift, it's your responsibility to do what you will with
Yeah.
it. That's fascinating. And I just want to say that when you look at us South Africans, I mean, we're diverse. We're a diverse nation, and
Yeah.
sometimes, um, let's say the work environment, for example, you'd find someone who's as qualified as you are getting the job, and maybe someone is not as qualified as you are, or you feel like you were doing a better job than them, and they get promoted. You're like, I don't understand. Is it race? Is it because of is it gender? Is it this and that? So I like the fact that we can see that, and it would also be interesting to see how different races also perceive that. If Mama
Yeah.
Africa is not giving someone of a different race, now they're questioning whether it's a race thing or not, or a gender. Those type of concepts are very interesting. I just wanna let you know, guys, that the reason I'm doing this to begin with is I admire the both of you for being so bold to doing something like this in a South African market where we don't really have an industry, as you guys have mentioned. I like the fact you guys are so persistent. You guys are going to Comic-Con. You guys are attending interviews. You guys are doing whatever it takes to inform the audience, to teach kids. I think, Mpilo, you mentioned something in a previous interview about early childhood development. It for me that's remarkable. The fact that you guys are so smart and you are persistent and you persevere. That in itself is a trait that I believe that young Nelson probably will have or already has because you're already living out some of the traits that we're gonna see in the comic anyway. And it's gonna come to my
Yeah.
next question, which is I've noticed that you guys are fit, man. Like I don't know if you hit the gym every day or what's happening, but but I feel like part of your being is in Nelson. Because when I look at you guys, I can see that you're well built, you take care of yourselves, you're smart. And is that something? Was that a conscious thing or just a subconscious thing?
Yeah,
To
well, thank you first of all. I
sure,
think what I would say is, I think when you write stories, you do draw from yourself. Like
right?
I've never boxed. Well, did I box? No, I've never boxed. I've done karate for like 6 months.
Wow, wow,
Um, I've done other sports. I've been interested in football, hockey. So yes, I've worked at a gym. So I've been in a fitness environment, and I do train quite a bit. And I
hmm,
think in a way, what you do is, like I've said, I took Muhammad Ali and Nelson
right,
Mandela for the character.
right,
And then I guess in thinking about like a dynamic African child, I think that's kind of like how I thought of Nelson, like kind of drawing from almost not just my own life, but also the young people that I've met. To be like, for example, my dad is somebody who's interested in like Plato and Socrates. I'm
right.
like, I've wondered like there's a lot of, and that's why, for example, I've looked at like Africans and I'm like, there's a lot of dynamic citizens, like not stereotypical citizens that you'd find, like South Africans that love reading, South Africans
True.
that love running in the morning.
Yeah,
Like if
yeah,
you wake
yeah.
up in the morning and you walk to work, there's South Africans that are running. Like,
Hmm?
if you when I was working at the gym, there's South Africans that are gym bunnies. You know, I would go to
Yeah,
the gym and I'd be motivated by other guys in the gym who are pushing hard.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So I think when I learned about how Superman was created, how they drew from the creators, the Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel,
Yes,
how they kind of drew from the strong men, they drew from movie characters. And
yes,
so yeah, I think in a way, I've looked at, even for example, Thabo Africa Nelson's real name. I drew from Thabo Mbeki, and look
wow,
for Africa as a generic name. So I
right.
think as you create a fictional character, you take from a bit of everywhere, and you
Mm,
try and
mm,
say, how do I take from myself, take from my
mm,
family, take from my life
mm,
experience, and
right.
create this metaphor for my culture, my nation, my um, philosophy of life. So yeah, I do say I think, seeing how I enjoy fitness and health and seeing how Nelson was a fitness buff. Like if you look at Nelson, he was like he touched me when he wanted to run, and because he couldn't run in the streets because he could get spotted, he'd
Mm,
run in place. I was there
mm,
was a time when I was slacking in my fitness
yeah,
regime, and I was
yeah,
like, hey, I'm kind of finding excuses. A man couldn't run on the streets. I'm,
yeah.
so I just started running and I started getting back to my training. So
Wow,
yeah, I
wow.
think fitness is very important. Fitness is very
Sure,
important and
sure.
helps to keep you motivated as well.
Yeah,
Mm,
I
mm.
think I think I'll agree. It's the same thing. Um, Kamala, like he's saying, we before comic books, like we did other stuff, like it was dance, and before dance, it was also football.
Yes, yes.
And
Mm,
so, yeah, and for me, I've kind of always found the importance of like where like my energy went, so not being able to obviously like when you get to varsity, there's like books and everything. So that's when
yeah.
like kind of comic books hold upon the way and so like we're saying when you have to find reference material for a writer, you pull upon his experience. So as an artist, usually you also kind of pull upon your experiences. So I
Mm,
think even
mm,
like trying to think like the South Africa that we kind of see and want to paint like through the comic book. There are also people that are like, yeah, but like there's no like shacks here. So like, no, guys, there's like
Yeah,
there's a new
yeah.
Look
vision. We're trying to
forward.
look forward to.
There's no
So
lions or anything.
yeah, tough life, tough life. We're going tough life.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, I feel like that's the best place to pull from. I think even Pamela upon studying Virgil Abloh, Virgil Abloh is saying that when he's much older, like he looks back at the things that interest him as a kid. And
Mm,
I think as I'm like really learning art and studying it, I've stumbled upon like this term called gesture, and
right.
it's basically like the essence of like a thing, like if you if I ask you to think of like a Rakhine, that's back home in the village and like he's bubbly, you kind of know like, and if you had to cast that character, you kind of know what to look for, and
Mm,
that's like, so those are like the things we try and pull visually or music or aesthetic,
right.
so yeah, that's like the things we try and lean on. You know, so yeah, I think the other interesting thing is also then starting to create other characters and to think about them. That's been like the next challenge for us. Like, how do you actually write for, you know, um, a female character and have it be a full
Mm,
character? Or
mm,
how do you bring in films also to then say, hey, can you guys bring more life to this character?
mm.
And to strike a balance between all of those things. So I guess that's like another topic, but yeah, I'd say we've pulled a lot from like the working out, the gymming, or sports.
Mm.
Um, yeah, before Comic Con.
Shout out, Buffett. So I just wanted us to just touch a bit on young Nelson's powers because I'm wondering about things like, I mean, you guys have mentioned that he's unemployed, right? So before we get into the powers, I'm just wondering like if he doesn't have super speed, for example, then since analytics, he has to like local town, you know what I'm saying? Because he's still a
Yeah,
human being, he's still unemployed, but if he has to now go fight a villain in Soweto, since analytics, yeah, not choice, you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
Yeah.
um,
yeah,
so I mean, those are the type of things, or maybe if he's flying and I don't know, there's some jet that he didn't know would pass by quickly. Now he has to, I
yeah,
don't know. So I just wanted to know what are his
yeah.
powers, man? What are some of the powers that people can witness as they are reading the comic?
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things that I thought about was the ability of having genius level intellect, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm,
which was something I learned Professor Xavier had. And my
right.
thing was, if I had genius level intellect, I wouldn't use it to create a concussive blast to blow up, let's say, a building. I would
Okay.
use it to solve real life problems.
Right.
So I would say young Austin, first of all, has genius level intellect, but he doesn't use it initially for psychic concussive blast, which he can do, right?
Wow.
So moving things, telepathy, all of
Right.
those uh, are things that he will be able to do, he will learn, right?
Mm, mm,
But my thought process was, okay, I didn't want to give Nelson brute strength because I thought it would be a stereotypical ability to give an
right.
African character,
Right.
right? So I
Right.
wanted to look at genius level intellect and reinterpret it. So imagine if Professor Xavier, instead of using his abilities to just move things back and forward in the room, move buildings, what if he actually used his intellect to solve real world problems? And that's
Mm,
kind of how I saw young Nelson move into his spaces. In a one-on-one combat, Nelson could use superpowers to fight.
right.
He could use hand-to-hand combat to fight. So he's a very classic hero in what kids want to see.
Mm,
The visual effect type of hand-to-hand combat,
right.
super speed, agility. From Mama Africa's interaction, you're going to see the powers begin to. I think there's a very organic process that I enjoyed, that Superman learning his powers. I
Mm,
I think I don't know. I'm somebody who enjoys. the journey of going with the hero, learning his powers,
Mm,
and almost every ability having a moral that comes with it, a lesson that comes with it, you
right,
know.
right.
But more than anything is I imagine what if Nelson could step by step, first of all, collaborate with other heroes to
Mm,
solve um water crisis, to solve,
yes,
early
yes.
childhood uh,
Mm,
problems. So if he is a genius level intellect citizen, at the end of the day, he might be a genius entrepreneur, but he needs to
right,
collaborate with genius agriculturalists,
right,
genius technicians. So also
right.
his ability to collaborate and network with people is also his strength. I mean,
Mm,
you could be a genius, but if you're somebody who's abrasive, who pushes people away, you know, you can't get big projects done. So I
100%.
think he's not a lone soldier. I think that's the other thing. He's a
Yeah,
genius, but he can collaborate, he can network,
right,
he
right,
can bring in people that might cameo in a story. But at
right.
the end of the day, it's about problem solving.
Mm,
But there
mm,
will be
mm.
combat. There will be a villain. There
Sure.
will be the classic comic book story. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
just solution based intellect.
No, that's amazing because in as much as, I like that you touched on that because in as much as we love heroes who beat villains up and they take them to jail, we still have load shedding. We still have a water crisis. We still have GBV.
Yeah,
you know. And I'm not sure if you saw the first issue of Superman with Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, as you've mentioned that in the first comic,
yeah,
Superman beats up an abusive husband. You know,
yeah,
so
yeah,
you see that these guys were actually not just tackling alien threats or whatever; they were
mm,
also bringing it home, Brown Street level normal problems that people have, and
yeah,
sending a message on that. And to me, Bill Cosby, when he did A Different World, he inspired
yeah,
Americans so much that a lot of kids wanted to go to college after that. And for me, once I see a character like young Nelson having genius level intellect and he's speaking about things I don't know, I'm gonna want to take a book and be like, what did he just say? And try to
yeah,
open the dictionary and trying to find out what he just said because, hey, man, if this unemployed 19-year-old, I don't know how old he is, but a 19-year-old kid
yeah,
is that smart, I need to know, I need to be on his level, for me to comprehend
yeah,
what else he's gonna be talking about. So I'm glad that you guys are taking that approach and you're not being preachy, but you are
yeah,
finding smarter ways. I mean, there's so many things that I've gathered from just talking to you guys. One is we get to know more about Mandela. We get to
mm,
understand South African culture. We get to understand the importance of grandmothers in society, especially Black mothers. We get to understand some of the problems that we have as a country and how we can tackle them. I mean, you never know who might get an idea on how to solve a problem by reading your comic, right?
yeah,
There's also the
yeah,
importance of education, which is a problem in our country. You guys are also tackling unemployment. You guys are also tackling fitness and health, because if you have a superhero that is healthy and is fit, you're inspiring kids not to, I don't know, to be conscious of those things. So you guys are
yeah,
tackling so many things into this comic book, but you're not doing it in such a way that it sounds like, yeah, hit the gym every day. No, no, no. You just see the guy. You look at the
yeah,
guy and you see, you're
yeah,
like, yo, I wish I could be as built as this guy. Or you hear him having a conversation about, I don't know, about load shedding, and he's coming up with these ideas.
yeah,
You're like, ah, you know what? I need to be more informed about load shedding. So I like how you guys are. I mean, it's even though it's just one character, it's two characters. It's Mama African, Young Nelson, and other heroes that might come
yeah,
about. There's so much that kids can learn. And one thing I've noticed is, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Power Rangers. Um,
yeah.
there used to be a character called Billy there, and Billy was like the smart guy. He was not the best in terms of combat, but
The Blue
a lot of a lot of kids wanted to be as smart as that guy. So so
Yeah,
yeah, so man, this is a strong IP. It's a powerful IP. I
thank
think,
you.
and I think what I like more about it, I've mentioned this before, but I'll continue to mention it. You guys are pushing or driving this Rainbow Nation concept forward. And it's something that I feel is lacking in our modern
Mm.
times. I feel like everybody's pushing an agenda that is anti-Rainbow Nation. But
Mm.
if we have kids who grow up, I mean, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, "Teach the kids the way of the Lord" or something while they're still young, so that when they grow, they do not depart from it. And I think the same
Yeah, yeah,
mentality, if you teach kids the Rainbow Nation concept while they're still young,
Mm.
I mean, when they get
Mm.
older, they will not depart from that because they will be growing
yeah,
up with the knowledge that look, we are all diverse, but we are one. We have the same blood. It
yeah,
doesn't matter what the color of our skin. It doesn't matter whether we're able or disabled, um, whether we know much or not. But we can unite and try to solve problems, just like how young Nelson is
yeah.
doing it, and that is remarkable, gents. Um,
Right.
I just wanted to ask you guys, how can people get access to your comics? Can they hit you up on social media if they want to order these comics, and how will they get them delivered, and all of that?
Awesome. So the comic books are available digitally on the House of Comics platform.
Okay.
Then they could we've got our should I do via email?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we can.
Yeah, so they can hit us up on raymonationcomics@gmail.com. Oh yeah, or at socials at Raymond Comics.
Mm.
Okay.
So yeah, if they just let us know, hey, we'd like a comic, then we can just take it from there.
So you can send them a PDF, and then they can read like the PDF version or something.
Yeah, so on the House of Comics platform, you can read the digital version.
For
Okay.
free.
Yeah,
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 on House of
yeah.
Comics. Yeah.
And then
So
if they would wanna, yeah, if they were looking for hard copies, they could just email us directly on raymonationcomics@gmail.com, and then we could just arrange with them to have them get the hard copy. But it's also in bookstores, so exclusive
ah,
what do you call this, bargain books.
mm.
So if you just rather go to the bookstore, if you don't not looking for a signed copy or anything like that, you just want the copy, you can just go into like exclusive or yeah, any any bookstore.
Can you just share a bit
Yeah.
about houseofcomics.com? I've never heard of that. What is that? Is that an app? Is that a website?
Yeah,
What?
yeah. So House of Comics is like I think they would be um global. They mostly based in South America, and then
Oh,
what they do, they've just started a project now in Africa where they like now beginning to explore collaborating with African creators. So it's an
wow.
app where you kind of you go on and then you just I think it goes via Facebook. You can get in through Facebook, and then yeah, you just type in Young Nelson, and then you should be able to you should pop up.
Wow.
Yeah,
No, thank you guys so much for your time. I hope that whoever's going to be watching this will be inspired by you guys and will want to learn more about Young Nation. And if they keep hitting your DMs, just know that they are as curious as I was and I am,
yeah.
to learn more
Yeah.
about these things. Thank you once again for for giving me this opportunity. You guys have always been very kind to me ever since I saw you guys at Comic Con, and I truly appreciate it. But I hope we can
Pleasure.
have a discussion later on. Once maybe I read the first comic, I'll hit you guys up again to just discuss the storyline and stuff like that, just to get more of an understanding of the law and the Rainbow Nation universe. But thank you so much, guys. I
Thank
hope I'll
you.
see you guys next time. But yeah, that's it.
Definitely.
All right.
We're looking forward to
No.
Comic Con.
All right. Sure thing. Sure thing. All right,
Sure,
guys. Cheers, ne? Thanks. All right.
sure.
Sure.